everyone. Thank you for joining us. And I really want to thank Cheryl Landes, our guest speaker for today. She has a really important story to share, and she also has lots of information that can help you if you're experiencing that. So before we get started, I want to show a few slides just as background. So the Essential Mindset offers insights, resources, and support to help you thrive during life's unexpected challenges, be they a health crisis, a natural disaster, a family emergency, or a business downturn. The show features real-world advice and thought-provoking inspiration from notable experts. We examine resilience, adaptability, growth mindset, foundational health, and best practices for achieving success in life and work. This is me. I'm your host of The Essential Mindset, and I'm an award-winning global high-tech industry expert working with Fortune 100 companies. Cannot talk straight. I'm a three-time book author, top-tier traveler, keynote speaker, business owner, wife, and mother, but it took nearly dying from overwork, burnout, and rampant stress to teach me that success at the expense of your health and all you hold dear is not sustainable, and compromising your dreams was not an option. So today, I'm on a mission to help busy professionals to bust stress and build success. So a few housekeeping slides. The show is being recorded and will be available shortly after the end of the show. You can ask questions. There's a Ask a Question tab for you to use throughout, but we will not be answering questions during the show. We're going to answer them at the end. But if it's a technical issue, by all means, ask them, and I have somebody in the background who will answer it for you. You can access a number of different pieces of content. If you look and see the paperclip icon, that has a whole bunch of attachments. So Cheryl has got a number of resources. There's contact information for Cheryl, contact information for me, and a whole lot of other things. So be sure to take a look at that. And we'd really appreciate it if you rate the show when you leave the show today. It helps us to understand how effective the show has been for you and plan for the future. So today's show is about mental health. And 1 in 5 people suffer from a mental health condition. And many of their loved ones in the workforce are caring for them. Cheryl Landes talks about coping at work when caring for a spouse with mental illness. She's going to share her story and provide guidance for caregivers to help them find support and ensure they provide care for themselves as well. And this is Cheryl. She's a technical communications consultant, and she has experienced the challenges of taking care of a husband with an undiagnosed mental illness. And she's recently written a book, which you can see on the side there. And she's going to be talking a little bit more about that and offering a free one a little later in the show, called The Best I Can Do, where she describes her experiences helplessly watching her husband decline as it tore their lives apart and forced them into homelessness, and how she was able to go on a journey of recovery. So here we are. So thank you again, Cheryl. I think this is such an important subject. So I do have a number of questions for you. So the first one is, can you give our listeners an understanding of the challenges that you faced with your husband?
My husband was extremely paranoid, and I suspect, just from information that I had researched when I was going through this with him, that he probably had paranoid schizophrenia. He probably also had a condition that a lot of people have not heard about called anosognosia, which often accompanies schizophrenia. And what that is, that it's a condition where people really cannot understand that they have a condition, and that they think everybody else has a problem. So they are completely unable to realize that they have some kind of mental illness. So with him being so paranoid, his two biggest obsessions were um, people constantly following him, bugging our home, the phone, all of that. He was believed he was contaminated with an odorless, colorless substance. And the worse that his condition got, he lost trust in everybody, including me. So that added a lot more challenges to our relationship. And it got to the point where he would disappear, sometimes for hours at a time. He would just leave and come back. Um, Eventually, it was days at a time, and then eventually he was gone and resurfaced months later in New York City, which I still don't know how he got there. So it was really challenging for me to just figure out what was going on from moment to moment, and it was very stressful, especially when I was working full time.
I can imagine, or I can't imagine. It's just such a difficult situation. So, as you were beginning to understand this and as you were starting to become aware, why were you reluctant to talk to others about your husband's situation?
My biggest concern was his behavior. It was just bizarre, like some crazy examples, no pun intended on the crazy part, is that one time when we lived in Seattle, he came home from somewhere and he had this scanner. It had a wand with attached to this box, and he was scanning the whole house. And I was sitting there going, "What on earth is going on?" And he wouldn't let me look at the box. He wouldn't let me touch it. And I finally figured out it took a while that he was trying to see if he could detect bugs in the house. Um, Another one was we eventually moved to New York City because he was going through a career change, and I talk about this in the book. And he started putting a chain with a padlock around the refrigerator so that no one could get in there and put any of this colorless substance in his food. And so we were not eating right. We were not eating healthy at that time. So those are a couple of examples. And because his behavior was so bizarre, I was struggling to believe it. And so I thought, if I tell anybody else about this, they're not going to believe me either, because it's just not something that you run into every day. So I did not talk about it until I absolutely had to.
Yes, very difficult. I mean, unless somebody else sees it and then you can offer an explanation. Offering an explanation in advance, it just seems like, it's bizarre. As you said, it's very difficult for other people not experiencing this or aware of it to understand. But you ended up telling your manager about the situation that you were facing with your husband. Why did you do it? How did you prepare for the whole discussion with your manager? And what was their reaction?
Yeah, it got to the point I really had no choice. It was at the time where my husband was disappearing longer, and just it it was everything was so unpredictable. My life was completely out of control, as was his. And so I had a performance evaluation at the company, and I usually had high performance evaluations. And this one was high, but not as high as normal. And the reason is my manager was telling me that he had noticed I was making more mistakes. And I'm just going, how could this be? I'm so careful with everything. And so it really hit me. And I did a lot of thinking about it. It was about a 2-week period that I thought about it a lot, and decided I'm going to have to tell him, because things are getting worse. And what if something else happens? And I have to leave work or do something on no notice, which eventually happened. So I scheduled a meeting with him, and I did have a talk prepared, what I was going to tell him, but that never happened because as soon as I sat down in his office and started to tell him what was going on, I broke down. I literally just started crying and I couldn't even talk. And so he handed me a box of tissues and said, "Just take your time. We don't have to rush on this." And finally, I was able to briefly tell him about my husband. And then he really surprised me by saying, "My wife is a psychiatrist. And if you don't mind," he even asked me permission, "if you don't mind, I will talk to her and see if there's any information that she can give you to get some help." And I said yes. And the next morning, as soon as he walked into the office, he came by my cubicle and asked me to come into his office. He wanted to talk to me. And he handed me a list of 4 phone numbers that his wife provided that night where I could call and talk to someone. Those numbers did not give me the help I need, but eventually, after a lot of referrals, I was able to find an organization that did provide some help. And I'll talk more about this later.
But that's actually, you couldn't have asked for a better response. I mean, the likelihood of his wife being a psychiatrist, probably vanishingly small,
Yes.
but he was so understanding and he was so as helpful as he could be at that time. And helping you to understand, that there is help out there, that you're not alone, that there are people that can help. Maybe not, as you said, what he first was able to provide for you, but that certainly is, I guess, better than many could expect to have.
Yeah.
And you got another manager after that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
how did that go?
Well, so another thing that I didn't mention is my manager at the time when I revealed this also told me at the end of our conversation, "I will never tell anyone what you're going through." And he said, "I will support you any way I can." And he did. He
Wonderful.
never said anything. And I was nervous about that because I had people in the past tell me, "Oh, I won't tell anybody." And then as soon as they leave, they tell somebody, you know? um, yeah, you've been there too. um, it's so at that time, he was reporting to um, another person in our department, which eventually there was a restructure, and I wound up reporting to him, this other person that was my manager's manager, and the rest of the department was reporting to him. So they made it more of a vertical structure instead of the way it was when I first worked there.
Mhm.
And so his manager started asking questions, and my manager never said anything. All he said was that I was going through a tough time and that everything was under control, although it really wasn't. But work-wise, I had
Right.
everything under control. It's like if I had to leave, I would come back and make up my hours, which meant some really weird scheduling, but I always got my work done, and I think that puzzled his manager. It's like, "I don't see her, but she's getting her work done. What's going on here?" Um, but when it got to the point where my manager's manager was pressuring him to say something about what's going on with me, my manager came to me, another private talk, and said, "This is what's going on. I am not going to tell him." It was just like, "You can do whatever to me, but I'm not going to disclose." And he said, "It's up to you if you want to tell him. That's I'm leaving that up to you, but I'm not going to say anything. And so I did, because I really appreciated my boss supporting me. And it went fine. After I started reporting to this my manager's manager, there was one time that he slipped, and it was when I was taking a vacation. I was working in Massachusetts when all this happened. Oh no, I'm so sorry. That was my phone. Okay. Um, I was working in Massachusetts when this was all going on. So I took a vacation and I came back to the Northwest, which I consider my home. And he had told all the other vice presidents in the company, which there were many, including him, that I was going on this vacation. And it's like, why did he tell them that? They don't need to know. And I did have a talk with him. Actually, I was kind of unprofessional during that talk, but it was because I was so upset and I had so much stress already from what was happening with my husband that I just came unglued. He never did it again. And fortunately, he never called me on it either. But I think he was more shocked than anything that the way I acted. But that's what happens when you're under a lot of stress and you're constantly in this mode just trying to figure out what you're going to do next, and you don't know what's going to happen next. It's like a boxing match, all these punches are coming at you and you're trying to react and figuring out what to do.
Yes, and confidentiality and all those sorts of things are part of what a manager needs to be aware of. And yes, personal mixing with business is problematic, but a good manager and understanding what's going on, as long as you're in control with what you're delivering, is something that I don't know. I shouldn't have mentioned it, but when you do get questions happening inside, the company, what's this? Why are they away? Why are they, taking off rapidly? Those sorts of things. It's always a challenge, but a good manager will abide by confidentiality working with you, unless it's impacting your job or there's some other impact within the company. So when you continued to work for that manager, were there any further issues, or it just sort of became background and there were no further things that caused problems?
That was the only one. After that, he was very careful about what he would say. I think the other issue with this person was he was new to managing. He
Mhm.
he was very highly educated. He came from an Ivy League school. I'm not going to say more than that because I might disclose his identity, but to
Right.
people who know him. But from what I knew about his background, he had never managed a team. And here, all of a sudden, he was managing, I think there were 10 people in our department. And so there was a lot of learning on both sides. It's like we were training his subordinates were training him, and he was training us at the same time.
Right. It is never an easy situation, regardless. But I think maybe one of the biggest takeaways from this is that when the situation does start to impact your work, or there's incorrect assumptions about your work because of something that's happening at home, it's time to take charge and make sure that people are aware and
Mhm.
understanding. And as long as you don't take advantage of the situation, that that should be it. It should just be understanding on both parts, and you are doing the best you can possibly do to manage the situation.
Yes, and there were signs now that I look back, but I was, as I was saying earlier, I was just in this constant rush, rush, rush with
Right.
everything that was going on and in reaction mode all the time, that
Yes.
it didn't dawn on me until I started thinking back. And so it's really important, if it's possible, and I know it's not always possible, to kind of step back and just evaluate, what's going on now, and figure out, are some things that I've noticed or you've noticed need to be addressed? And do I need to talk to my manager at this point? One example was, um, I had scheduled a meeting. This was before my performance evaluation, and my manager at the time was not part of this meeting, but his boss was. And so I scheduled this meeting. It was at 8 o'clock in the morning when we started work for the day. I forgot about it. So I was in Starbucks down the road getting a cup of coffee,
Mm.
and I'm in line, and my boss's manager was standing behind me, and he taps me on the shoulder, and I look at him, and he's grinning at me like he was ready to tell a joke. And so I'm just kind of looking at him, and I say hi, and he said, "Aren't you supposed to be somewhere else right now?" And that's when it hit me. Oh shoot, I have a meeting. I'm leading the meeting. And then it dawns on me, well, why is he here? And so I asked him, well, aren't you supposed to be there too? And he goes, yeah, but I need to get my coffee first. I'll see you when I'm done. So
Oh, wow.
so I rescheduled the meeting, but that was embarrassing. And it was just because I'd had a bad night with my husband, and I totally forgot.
Yeah. Yeah. So that is definitely personal impacting business, and trying to stay on top of everything at the same time is having to learn coping mechanisms in order to ensure that whatever's going on behind the scenes doesn't impact, whenever you can control it, which is difficult, but whatever you can control, you do control,
Mhm.
so that you don't end up being in a difficult situation. And I know myself as a manager, when I had a whole team of people working for me, I had 14 people working for me at one point, and one person was starting to go through a health crisis, which was impacting his mental health. And I just couldn't figure out why he wasn't performing. He was one of my best people, but he wasn't performing. And it did eventually come out. And then, of course, I was understanding. So it really is this sort of back and forth. Is like, if I'd known sooner, maybe I wouldn't have been so unhappy with his performance, or maybe I could have worked with him to change things. Now, that's not always possible, and you don't always get the right kind of boss that will be understanding in that way. Certainly, when I worked full time, there were those situations. So it, as you said, it's a balancing act. There's a lot of things, and it isn't easy no matter what you decide to do. But you need to let them know in some way, so it doesn't long term impact you with your job. So you you also said that you considered telling your coworkers about the situation, and you also mentioned that some you told and some they immediately told somebody else. um, how did you decide who to tell, when to tell, um, how that worked out? What was the things that worked for you when you were sharing this, fairly private information with people?
Yeah, I think the advantage is I had worked there for 3 years at that point. Um, I know some people aren't that fortunate when they're going through something like this, but my instincts, I could tell usually when somebody was very careful with guarding information. And so it was some of the people that I worked the closest with, for example, the training manager, his assistant. I think those were the two other people I confided in the most. I didn't talk about it a lot, but when I did have to say something, if something was affecting work or I suddenly had to go somewhere, I would tell them. There were 3 other people in the company too that I eventually told what was going on, but I never shared a lot of information, and they were all very supportive. Um, there were other people I avoided, especially there was this one person who I knew if I said anything that it would spread all across the company. And we were a fairly small company. We were owned by a bigger corporation. It's worldwide, but our little subsidiary was about 100 people. And so word spreads fast in a company that size. And so I really trusted my intuition because at that point I was learning a lot about my intuition too, that if I ignored it, I was going to get in a lot of trouble. And I did.
So in terms of okay, so your intuition. So did you try talking with just one person to start out with and see how well that went? And then only expand it to sort of need to know individuals? Or did you tell a couple people at once, not in the same meeting or anything, but how did you decide?
Yeah, I started with one person that I worked even closer with than the two people that were in charge of the training. And that came about mainly she kind of approached me and just said, it seems like something's going on because we sat kind of next to each other in different cubicles.
Mm.
And so she said, well, if there's anything I can do, let me know. But she didn't know what was going on either. And I told her I had worked closely enough with her over those 3 years that I knew she wouldn't say anything. So that's where it started. And then I talked to the other people eventually.
Right, right. That's I think that's a good idea to keep it small and then see how that goes, and because not everybody needs to know. It's none of their business.
Yeah. And the other issue that I noticed very quickly is that people are afraid to talk about mental illness. It's getting better, not a lot better, but better. And I think it's because more public figures are now talking about it and being brave about it. But back then, this was in 2003 to 2006 when the worst of this was going on. It wasn't that way. And some people, if I said anything, that these are like, I had some friends who, when I did mention it to them, they they just stopped having anything to do with me. Even to this day, 20 years later, some of these people, they just stay away from me. And my husband passed away 8 years ago. So it can be hard on the person who's going through this when something like that happens. But it does and it's mainly because people are afraid of it. They don't understand it and they don't learn about it so that they can understand it.
Yes, we do see that with, in particular, with mental illness or any, people are, oh, I'm so sorry to hear that, and then just ghost you over time. They don't know how to handle it. They don't know what to say. They don't want to deal with difficult feelings and those sorts of things, and it's extremely unfortunate. Um, but as you went through this journey, you built new relationships and new friendships and new ways of people who understood what you were going through.
Yes.
So you mentioned that your first manager had given you some not emails, phone numbers to call uh, to get some information. If we sort of look at, sort of the wider workplace, you've mentioned that some workplaces have resources for employees, such as counseling or referrals and things like that. Other than your manager at that time, were you able to get any assistance through the company? Were there any programs like that you could tap into?
There were. Our company, when I started at the company, it had been bought out by this bigger corporation. And so there was still a lot of integration going on even 3 years later. And that continued the entire time I worked there. I was there for 7 years. And at the time that things got really super bad with my husband, and I had to tell my manager about this, the programs that we could tap into were just becoming accessible to our subsidiary. And so there was how we accessed them, there was a toll-free number we could call. The programs were not the people who were in the area where these programs were offered, they were not employees of the company, so they were contracted out. And I think most big companies are that way. I don't think the people who are providing access are employees. That's just the impression I've received from other people who work for large corporations. So I was able to call, and it worked to a certain point with me. And the reason is because I needed such specific needs, and the line that I called was more equipped to handle more basic things like find a counselor. Well, I already had a counselor because my doctor referred me to one. And that may not make sense to people. Why would I be seeing a counselor when my husband had the mental illness? And my doctor said, just trust me, this will help you too, just to be able to talk to somebody and about what you're going through and finding solutions. So it turned out they were able to give me some general information that was helpful. So what I would say is it really depends on your needs. It really depends on the type of programs that your employer provides when you're accessing these resources. But one thing I would say is be persistent. Don't give up. Do whatever you can to get the information you need. And sometimes you really have to go over the top on being persistent to get what you need, but it's worth it.
And so, as I understood it, you also went beyond what the company would offer. So, how did you go about finding those resources or finding information that helped you?
I had two very close friends in Seattle, and I had taken a vacation to go to a conference, but I also took some days off to go on vacation for a few days. And this was after I finally figured out what was going on with my husband. It took me a long time to figure out what was happening to him. But when I had lunch with them in downtown Seattle, and we were talking, and my friends were catching me up on what was going on because we hadn't seen each other for a long time. And then one of my friends, who is the most persistent of the two, said, well, what's going on with you? Because I wasn't telling them what was going on with me other than, oh, I'm in Massachusetts and I have this wonderful job and we have 4 seasons. It's not raining a lot, but it snows, all that kind of stuff. And so my friend said, well, how's your husband doing? They knew that we had moved to the Northeast because my husband was going to do a career change after he was laid off from his job in Seattle. And that never happened because he gave up. And so finally, she just wouldn't give up until I told her what was going on. And I really didn't think they would believe me. At the same time, I was thinking, well, they're my two closest friends. So if they don't believe me, who's going to believe me? And when I told them, the first thing that my friend who was, keeping on to me, going, okay, spill the beans here, she said, you need to see your doctor, my regular doctor. And I said, well, what can she do? She's not a psychologist or a counselor. And she said, she will know what to do. Just go do it. And so as soon as actually, as before I left, flew back to Boston after that trip, I scheduled an appointment with her, and she was the one who referred me to the counselor. And she was very concerned, and she told me back then HIPAA wasn't as predominant as it is now. She told me that my husband had actually scheduled an appointment with her, and then he canceled it the day before he was supposed to come, which I didn't know. So that's how it started for me. And then also through the series of phone numbers that my manager had given me, I eventually found an organization called the National Alliance on Mental Illness. NAMI is another way it's called. And they referred me to a class that they teach called Family to Family, which is for caregivers, and it's taught by caregivers. They follow a script that's developed by the national organization. And that's where I learned a lot about mental illness, about the symptoms, about what kinds of treatments there were, and about what I could or could not do as the loved one of someone going through this. And so that also, just having that information made a big difference, because up until then it was really hard to get information and really hard to figure out where to go to get it.
Right. So I think what you're saying is that individuals should talk to their family doctor or
Mm-hmm.
whomever they're seeing on a regular basis to see if they can get referrals to others and more information. And then you also mentioned NAMI, and as I understand it, you have attached a list of resources where people can go, where people can find more information. Is that correct? That we've got that
Yeah.
here on attached on the show?
Yes, and I keep adding to that list when I find more information. But what I would recommend to people, and I'm not doing this to promote NAMI, even though I'm involved in NAMI a lot now, um, I think it's the best place to start. Well,
Okay.
talk to your doctor and then go to NAMI, because they have a list of resources. If you have a local, they're called affiliates, the chapters, they're called
Mhm.
affiliates. We have one here. I live in Vancouver, Washington, and so we have one in downtown Vancouver. Not every town has one, but you can also go to the state office. Every state has an office, and you can contact them by phone or online. And their websites also have a lot of resources online, as does the national organization. But it's a good place to start and just start getting information. There's a lot of information on there.
Yeah, that's so useful. I mean, without information, you can't manage the situation. And even with information, there are some things that are challenging, but at least you know what you need to know and where to turn and who to ask and what resources are out there for you and for your loved one, who, if
Yeah,
you have that opportunity to have them in some way managed, their mental health managed.
yeah, and my biggest challenge, which people who read the book will see this, is that I wanted to get help for my husband. I couldn't help him because he didn't trust me anymore. He didn't trust anyone in his family,
Mhm.
even the brother he was closest to, even though he'd keep in touch with his brother. So, it never made sense he would keep in contact, but he still didn't trust the person that he loved, which, yeah. Um, but I learned that if someone does not acknowledge they need help and seek it for themselves, there's nothing that their loved ones can do. And that was
Mhm.
hard to learn,
I'm
and
gonna
I
just
learned
say
that.
that must be very difficult.
It was because the brother he was closest to was an attorney. And even being an attorney, there was nothing he could do because my husband couldn't acknowledge was unable to acknowledge that he had a problem and that he needed help.
Right. You have to want help in order to get help, and you need to know that you need help in order to want help to get help, and that's very, very difficult. I think that really leads into my next question for you, because obviously this is incredibly stressful. It's very anxiety causing. It does, when you're under a tremendous amount of stress and anxious about things, having to deal with things that are not, sort of everyday activities that you need to deal with, it can be really, really hard on you as the caregiver, or whatever your role happens to be. So what did you do in order to start taking care of yourself so that you could be strong, you could be healthy for them and for all the different things that you needed to do?
I love the outdoors, and it's hard to explain, but there's just something about nature that has always comforted me. And so near the office, we had an arboretum, and the admission was free. All we had to do was just park there and go for a walk. And so a lot of my lunch hours, I would go there and just walk around the whole arboretum. It was about a half hour walk to do the whole thing. And it made a huge difference just having that respite in the middle of the day. When my husband was disappearing for longer periods, like days at a time, and then eventually he was just gone, I started finding places to walk after work, different places around the office. Massachusetts has an Audubon Society that has about 35 or 40 properties, and there were quite a few of them near the office or within 20 or 30 minutes drive. And I would just go there after work and just walk, and it helped. On the weekends, I started picking places of different places in New England where I could just go hike. And I'd usually do like a 10-mile hike in one day. And it sounds like a lot, but it was it was how I coped, and it really made a difference.
That's really interesting. There's been a lot of recent research on nature and stress reduction and anxiety reduction and things like that. And there are actually organizations. Um, I'm Canadian, and in Canada, we have an organization which are prescribing nature
Mhm.
to people to help them with this kind of situation. And walking is a wonderful way. It's a simple way of getting exercise, but exercise increases your endorphins, which are your feel good hormones that help to reduce the anxiety, help to reduce the depression and stress and everything that you're feeling. So when you're combining that with nature and, fresh air and trees and all sorts of things out in nature, it can really, really make a difference. And you were extremely lucky to have that arboretum. And I know that I do the health coaching now with people, and stress is my focus. And what people are saying, well, I live in a big city. So, I mean, you mentioned New York, but hey, New York has got tons. Of course, you've got Central Park, but there are lots of little parks. And in every state, there is some park nearby. Even if all you do is go out and stand under a tree and just kind of listen to the wind and the leaves and that sort of thing can really, really make a difference. And it doesn't take money. It does take a little bit of time, but it doesn't take money. It's not too strenuous. It's not going to, you know, you don't have to run a marathon or anything of that nature. You just need to um, get out there and enjoy it. The other places people can look, so like there's a lot of campuses, the Apple campus, Microsoft campus. I know all the high tech ones, and they're beautiful, and you never see people out there by, maybe there's a fountain, maybe there's a pool, maybe there's a walkway through a little, bit of trees or something like that. You can do that too. You can just go out at lunch, take your lunch with you, sit down next to some running water, those sorts of things. Even though we live in big cities, and I live in a big city of over 2 million people, there's always green. Somewhere there's green. And in the winter, just bundle up and get out there and walk. So
Yeah. And like here, well, the natives here, it rains a lot. It's a light rain or a mist, but
right.
in the wintertime, we just throw on our raincoats and go at it. But even smaller cities like Vancouver, Washington is about 200,000 people. We have a lot of parks here. There's even a park in the middle of the apartment complex where I live. It's not that big.
Oh,
The trail, it's just a loop. It takes about 10 minutes, but it's a trail and it goes through these wonderful trees and grassy area. So yeah, there are opportunities everywhere. And when I did live in New York, people walk a lot there anyway
they do.
because
They
it's
absolutely do.
it's faster to walk somewhere than it is to take a car, especially in Manhattan.
Yeah.
And I lived on Staten Island, so Staten Island has many more parks than you find in Manhattan. Staten
Yeah.
Island's population is about the size of Portland, Oregon, so that kind of gives you an idea.
Right.
About,
Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
500,000.
All right. So it's a very simple prescription for helping you to support yourself in self-care. Was there any other things that you did, changing, maybe eating more healthful diet, or, things like that also made a difference?
I tried to eat as healthy as I could, and it wasn't always possible, but at this time when things got really bad, I had to eat out because my husband didn't want me to cook. And so when I was at work, I would go to places like there's a supermarket that had a wonderful deli. They had different meals that they cooked hot every day. They had salads. So I would try to get things that were more nutritious, which really helped.
Yes. And food does have a huge impact on anxiety and stress, and eating healthfully versus eating junk food can make a big difference in someone's mindset. So those are great suggestions. Um, have one more question, and then we'll go to questions for people. So you talked about your intuition earlier, and then um, you mentioned that you gave your intuitions a name. I thought that was pretty unusual. I have not seen that before. But why did you do that, and how was that helpful?
Yeah, it was kind of accidental actually. So I started working in these little snippets in my book about the intuition saying something, and then I would respond somehow. And I was working with a developmental editor while I was writing this book and this was going on during the peak of COVID. And she started seeing a theme emerging here. And so she said, I think you need to explore this more. And it might not hurt to give it a name. I was like, okay. And so I picked Charlotte from Charlotte's Web. It's one of my favorite
Right.
childhood books, but she was a smart spider who was able to weave woods into her web to save Wilbur from being a Thanksgiving dinner. And so I'm thinking that's the perfect name for an intuition. So in the book I have conversations with Charlotte, and she's usually the one that initiates them, not always. Um, and it gets pretty interesting sometimes because we do have little arguments, and sometimes I didn't listen to her, and then I'd learn my lesson, and she'd never say anything. Just was like, okay, well, yeah, so you know now.
Now
Don't
you
do that
know.
again.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
it was fun to
interesting.
write.
You kind of distance yourself, and that's okay in a, in a simple sense of distancing yourself to be able to recognize what you need or what you need to know or what you need to do, because when you're so wrapped up in yourself, you're not always aware. So it's just kind
Mhm.
of a fun way of doing that. So interesting. I hadn't heard of that one before, but that's great. So we're going to take a few questions, but while we wait for people to put some questions in the Ask a Question tab, um, I understand you have a couple of special offers for our listeners. And so could you tell us about it while people put a few questions in?
Yes, so the first one will happen today. One person who's attending live on this broadcast will receive an autographed paperback book of my memoir. And so when I get the winner and their address, I will send that out to you. The second one is if you buy my book and review it on Amazon, Goodreads, wherever else, and you email a link to the review or a screenshot, I will send a free copy of my other new book, which came out in January. It's called Rainbows in the Snow. Rainbows in the Snow is just a collection of short stories, some haikus, a lot of my photographs. I'm also into photography, and it's the theme is loosely centered around journeys, not necessarily going from one point to the other, but like life's journeys and experiences that we have along the way in our lives. So it was a fun book to write, and so I'd love to share it with as many people as I can. Also, I wanted to mention that I've heard this a lot, and it's not necessarily true, so I just wanted to bring it up. There's a perception that if you did not buy the book on Amazon, that you cannot review the book on Amazon, which is not true. I have received books from authors, complimentary books to review, or I have bought books at book festivals and other places, and I reviewed them on Amazon, and Amazon has accepted my reviews. So you can publish them on Amazon.
And that certainly would reach a number of people
Yeah, it
who
gives.
are looking, a lot of people look
Yeah.
on Amazon, though there are other sources of books.
Yes, yes.
But
And
that's good to know.
yes, and I'm gradually this book is self-published. It's available on lulu.com, which is the publisher I use. So
Mhm.
you can also order it there. I'm working at getting it into bookstores. I have 4 bookstores in the Northwest that are interested now, so we're just finalizing everything to get that going. But you should be able to request this book from your bookstore as well if you want to support them.
That's excellent. It's good. It's really important to support our local favorite places to shop, like bookstores. All right. So we have a question here. The problem of not being able to get help for someone who doesn't acknowledge the problem is great. In my experience, you can't do anything until that person seems to be in danger of hurting themselves or someone else. And the question is that how you got him help?
I never was able to get him help. I tried once, and you're right. The person who asked this question is right. The only way that someone can be forced into help is if they're a danger to themselves or someone else. There was one night that this is after we separated. I went over to the apartment where he was living to type a paper. He was taking classes at the Harvard Extension School, and he didn't have it ready. So I told him, okay, I'm going home now. Fax it to me in the morning. And we faxed back then. Fax it to me in the morning and I'll type it and email it to you and you can print it out during my lunch hour. It was due the next evening. He took my keys away from me and he just had this really wild look in his face. I had never seen him like that before. So I called the police and they came. And so I'm thinking now maybe I can get some help for him. It didn't happen. They just basically blew the whole situation off, told me to go home and just stay away. And that was it. So it's also really hard. They have to be doing something really tragic, but then it's still really hard to get help. I know a woman right now whose daughter actually died, and they had been trying to get help for her for years, and it was difficult. And this person that I know actually works in the mental health field, and that just gives another example of how hard this is.
Yeah, there's a follow-on question here. And so maybe it was this situation, but it said, how long did it take you to realize that you would not be able to help your husband?
A long time. And I don't think I would ever figured it out unless I took the class through NAMI. It's called Family to Family for caregivers, because that's where we learned what caregivers' rights were and what the person's rights were that you were caring for.
Right. And that's so important to really understand that, not hearsay, not Google, not something else like that. It's going to where you can get actual information. So this has been a very valuable session today, and I really appreciate you being here. And thank you everyone else who's attended. Please don't forget to rate the show as you leave. And also to make sure you get copies of all of the resources that Cheryl has shared with us, and get your review out there. Really, it's so important to hear from people who have been there and can share their information. So thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, I must mention, obviously, sorry about that. Our next upcoming show is June 26th, and we're talking about another health issue, ADHD. And I'll be speaking with someone, Amber Swope, who had, later in life diagnosis of ADHD, not knowing that. And she was a tremendously successful entrepreneur. And again, I think we have a lot of lessons that we can learn from this. So thank you again for attending. I really appreciate it. Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.